Hello everybody, my name is John Mark Johnson Jr. and I'm the host of Reformed GGA, and today I'm here to do an initial impressions video of this little guy right here. This is the Palmetto State Armory AK, P standing for pistol, note the pistol brace on the end, and my overall impressions of it are fairly favorable, just to let you know that ahead of time. But there are definitely some qualifications that need to be given. As far as performance is concerned, last weekend I was able to take this thing out and shoot it. I put 170 rounds through it, which isn't a whole lot, but this is 2020 and was a little hard to come by and all that kind of thing. I do want to get more rounds through it eventually, but it is what it is. 170 rounds through it, no problems whatsoever. Ammo included things like Tula, both Tula full metal jacket and Tula hollow point. The cheap wolf stuff that's basically repackaged Tula. I've also put some of the Wolf, I believe it is 124 grain soft points through this, one full magazine. I don't have a ton of those, so I didn't do a ton, but I did put one full magazine through it, and it ate those just fine. So overall, in that regard, performance was good. And overall, I do like the thing. But as has been my experience with all of my Palmetto State Armory guns this year, and this was the first year that I started buying Palmetto State Armory guns, and all of some kind of AK variety. My first one was the AKB, which is their 9mm AK thing, and then was the full-size GF3, and now this one, the AKP. Every single one of them has had its issues, unfortunately, and this one was no exception. And knowing that all of the Palmetto State Armory guns have had issues of one form or another, this time I knew enough about what was going on to be able to get ahead of it. And because of that, this is the first gun that I've had that I didn't have any malfunctions the first time that I took it out and shot it. I had that experience with the AKV, I had that experience with the full-size GF3, but not with this little one. And the reason why is basically because I didn't give it a chance to fail. I didn't take it out of the box, clean it, and go start shooting it like I normally do. Instead, I took it out of the box, thoroughly inspected it, fixed a bunch of different things, and then took it out and shot it. And just so you guys know what some of the issues were, I'll go ahead and review those for you now. We'll go ahead and make sure that this thing is empty magazine, make sure the chamber is clear, and we are good to go. Alright, so as far as issues, I'm just going to work from the outside in. When I was going through this, I was actually originally trying to put in the Fostech binary trigger. It didn't work in the full-size one. Sent it off to Fostech because I wound up breaking it when I put it in the full-size one, trying to fire it, and it broke, and Fostech said they'd be willing to look at it, and they did. I had to pay for shipping to get it there, but they paid for shipping back, and they also paid for the repairs. So Fostech is upstanding company in that regard. Unfortunately, it still didn't fit in this Palmetto either. They just don't fit very well in the Palmetto State's Armory guns. Now, if you had a Dremel and you knew what you were doing, you might be able to move enough material to get them to work, but I worked on it for like a day and a quarter, not continuously, there were breaks in there, but for about a day and a quarter trying to get the Fostech trigger to fit in this one, and I got somewhat kind of close, but I just couldn't get it to ride over the hammer very well. Talking about the bolt carrier in this thing, to ride over the Fostech hammer very well. I just put way too much pressure on it and really slowed the bolt down. When the bolt was returning home, you could basically have a conversation about how slow the bolt was while the bolt was slowly making its way home. So, not good things. Like I said, if you had a Dremel and you could, eat material away faster, and you knew what you're doing to keep the right kind of contact on the right places and all that, you might be able to make it work for you, but for me, working with hand tools and those kinds of things, it just wasn't close enough to really work. So Fostech was very much so willing to fix their product and all that. Like I said, I had to pay for shipping there, but they handled all the repairs and the shipping back, and so no complaints from them. Unfortunately, it just didn't work out with this particular gun, but in the process of working on that, I noticed several issues with this gun. Like I said, it's a Palmetto State Armory, so I expected there to be issues, and going from the outside in, kind of sort of, the first one that I noticed was the brace. The brace attachment point here, the adapter, was loose. It was wiggly, so I backed out a couple of the screws that are inside the receiver here, put some thread locker on them, just blue Loctite, put them back in, tighten them down, and so far it hasn't given me any issues. But again, one of those things that I keep saying with Palmetto State Armory, there's lots of things that they could check and catch, you know, at the factory that they don't, so you're stuck doing it. All in all, though, having to tighten a couple screws is not altogether terrible. Going in from there, the next thing I noticed was this little dust cover here. This is very similar to the dust cover that they have on the AKV, their 9mm version. It's a hinge top, kind of sort of to give it the overall kind of crinked feel. Although the Russians don't ever call that version of the AK the crink, but we do. Most people who are into AKs know what I'm talking about. Although this is a 7.62x39 gun, obviously it's not a true crink, etc., etc. All the normal caveats apply. But to get to the issue with the top cover, I noticed that initially there was quite a bit of a gap up here at the front when it was closed. I could see basically over the top of this little block, and I've wound up realizing that there was a little piece of metal that was in here that was getting in the way, and it was keeping the cover from closing all the way. And you can see just a little bit of shine where that extra piece of metal was hitting the block and keeping it from closing fully. So I took a file and I shaved that little piece of metal down. We'll see if we can actually get some kind of an image here. No. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I should be able to see the shiny part of it being filed in there. So yeah, filed away all that material so that it could actually close correctly without running into that block. And now it closes just fine. Has good tight lockup right now. As time goes on, my experience with the AKV was that the finish on the little locking button would start to wear, and then the top cover would get looser. We'll see if that happens with this one. It probably will, and that kind of goes in with the expectations of this kind of gun. If you're going to go for a short barrel AK type gun like this, and especially if you're going to go one with a hinged top cover like this and you're planning on putting your optics on it, don't expect it to be overly accurate at long range. They don't always maintain zero very well, and like I said, it usually depends on how worn out that button gets as time goes on. But right now it's got good lockup, and so it's fine on that, but we'll see as time goes on. Alright, so yeah, the adapter was loose. The top cover was hitting the block right there and making it bend and do all kinds of weird things, so took care of that. And then in the process of trying to get the Fostech, set that aside for right now. In the process of trying to get the Fostech trigger to work, one of the things that I had to do, and this is common with all of the PSAs, is I had to do a lot of file work on the bottom of the bolt carrier. More or less reprofiling it so that it would actually function fairly smoothly, because for whatever reason Palmetto State Armory has created a system in which there's just way too much engagement between the bolt carrier and the hammer. And so I went through and reprofiled all that, and the Fostech also has a little blade on it that sits too high in the receiver, so I did some filing on this part of the bolt carrier as well. In and of itself, not too huge of a deal, but like I said, I kind of expected it, and especially when working with the Fostech, yeah, it definitely needed to be done. But even in my full-size GF3, it wound up needing a lot of these kinds of modifications as well. So, yeah, it's what it is on that one. Now, I've only, like I said, had 170 rounds through it, but so far, the bolt looks like it's in pretty good shape. Not noticing any serious deformation. In 170 rounds you wouldn't really expect to see any, but such as it is. Interestingly, the piston on this one is a little bit shorter than the one in the GF3, so slightly shorter piston, but not a big issue there. There is something that I did wind up having to change on the piston and the bolt carrier that I'll get to in a second. But before I get there, I will say that another thing that I wound up doing was to file the back of the hammer a little bit. So I filed the underside of the bolt carrier and the back of the hammer. Don't see how much you can see that shiny bit, but that shiny bit is the part that I filed down in order to make sure that it wasn't getting caught up on anything on the return stroke. Now, another issue that came up and wound up involving the bolt carrier has to do with the gas block. Now, one thing I will say that I like about this little one compared to the full-size one and even the AKV is that the gas tube seems to come out just a little bit easier. It's still kind of finicky, obviously, but it's usually not as hard for me to get out. Right now my hands are just a little oily from messing with all the innards. There we go. Woo! Okay. Gas tube came out. Yay! The gas tube itself wasn't a problem, but the gas port was definitely a problem, because when I line up the bolt carrier, more or less a normal way, it doesn't want to go over the hammer without the bolt being in it, so let me get that back in there. Alright, trying this again, what we like to call the right way. There we go. Alright, so fixing the backside in, that's the problem that I was having. When I let it rest naturally in the channel, the piston doesn't want to go into the gas block like it's supposed to. The piston is hitting high right, so the gas block is low left. Now, if I put a little bit of pressure on it, I can get it to go in, but it's kind of a tight, snug fit, which is not supposed to be the case. Now, gas blocks being a little bit off from the receiver, such that they don't quite line up, is actually fairly normal, and basically the reason why the gas tube is in there in AKs, because it guides the piston in. But if it's off by enough, it causes problems, and especially causes problems on both the return stroke and the outgoing stroke, because pieces are bent and twisted in ways that they're not supposed to be. And this one's still fairly tight. I push it in there and it kind of snaps out, and so it loses some energy that it could be spent, you know, operating and cycling the gun right there. And it's still a little bit off, but I got it to the point where it was functional through a fairly simple process. I'll go ahead and show you what I did there. On stay. Alright, what I did is on the piston head, I reprofiled one side of it so that as it would come in and it would hit the gas, because remember the gas tube is on there to help guide it a little bit, so it just kind of needed an extra little shove. And so I reprofiled part of the piston head, not a ton, but enough so that it would just kind of make that last little dip a little bit easier on it. And then also on the bolt carrier, I filed a little bit on what would be the back right side of the bolt carrier and the front left side of the bolt carrier to allow it to twist to the left a little bit, so it would have enough tolerance to move a little bit easier. It's still a little tight, but it is enough that it can actually cycle correctly and cycle correctly every time. So that was the important thing, and that's what it was able to achieve. So yes, technically it's out of spec, but with these changes it was enough to get it to be operational. Again, as I've said with these things before, these are the changes that I made that made the gun run right. I am not an approved Palmetto State Armory gunsmith in any way, shape, or form, so I'm not recommending that you necessarily do these things, but I've had these problems multiple times now, and these are the things that get the gun running right so that I don't have to worry about malfunctions in the future. Alright, so there was that. I'm trying to recall if there are any other major issues, and I really don't think that there were. Let's see, I mentioned that the adapter was loose, which is annoying, but it's a fairly simple fix. A little bit of Loctite and a driver. The dust cover was impacting this little block here and scratching it up just a little bit, but that was easily fixed enough with a file. There was too much engagement between the bottom of the bolt carrier and the hammer. That's a pretty simple fix. You file the bottom of the bolt carrier, you'll file the back end of the hammer, and you can take care of that issue, so it's not too big of a deal. It also had problems going into the gas block like it's supposed to. The piston did, so I reprofiled the head of the piston and also the sides of the bolt carrier just a little bit so that it could kind of bend into place a little bit more easily. And I think that's pretty much it. So with those changes, like I said last time I took it to the range, that's another thing I do like about these. The top covers, like I said, they do a lot of times eventually come loose because that button will start to wear out, the underside will lose the finish, and then the top cover will start to wiggle. But I do like that they hold the front of it fairly secure, so putting it back on is just as easy as just giving the thing a good smack and you're back in business. I do like that about them. Like I said, they don't hold zero super well, especially at distance, and it's exacerbated if you happen to use a very heavy optic, you know, a typical magnified optic, you know, fairly high power. And if you put it on the back of the rail, if you do what I did, which is to take a fairly small optic and mount it fairly far forward, it tends to mitigate a lot of those issues, and it becomes kind of a non-issue that way. And so I would suggest that if you want to run one of these things, be aware of that. So it's not going to be personally, in my opinion, it's not going to be the best gun for trying to get, you know, real super precise groups and put the shot exactly where you want it to. But for something that you either use for plinking at close range or something for kind of general body shots at the more extended ranges, it works. And like I said, be smart about what you use for an optic. Something small, light, and forward mounted is going to serve you a lot better. But yes, these do loosen up over time. But like I said, other than the issues that I mentioned, other than that, it's good, and those things were repairable. I don't think that Palmetto State Armory should have allowed this gun to go out in the condition that it was, and especially given that, you know, they are fixable problems. You know, there's no reason why they couldn't have fixed it there, at least rudimentarily. A little bit miffed about that, like I am generally with Palmetto State Armory, but the reason why I keep coming back to Palmetto State Armory is because for the price that you pay, the feature set that you get, and the fact that with some fairly basic hand tools, basically a couple of files, you can get it running pretty good. Yeah. You know, it's one of those things, you know, you kind of get a product that's in the rough, if you will. It's like going to a car dealer and they have this brand new car for you that has all the features you want, except the tires are freaking bald, and so you need to go to the tire store right after you go to the car store. Is that the way that a car dealership should sell a brand new car with bald tires on it? No, but if it's the car you want, if it's the features you want, if the price point is right, well, you know, maybe paying for a new set of tires in addition to the car ain't all that bad. And that's kind of where I am with Palmetto State Armory. So, yep, now it's functioning just fine. Like I said, 170 rounds, including soft points, hollow points, full metal jackets. Not a single hiccup or issue, because I preemptively went in and fixed all the things that I knew were going to be issues, and it runs just fine. And granted, my expectations for this thing are not super great. I was only shooting at 25 yards. I don't expect it to be a super great long distance gun. And yes, I did notice a little bit of shift. I lifted up the top cover and put it back down on a magazine that was working through, and there was a little bit of shift. Not a ton. Okay, we're talking like maybe a quarter to a half an inch at 25 yards. So, you know, like extend that out to, you know, 100 yards, we're talking like, you know, 1 maybe 2 MOA max. So it's not terrible. And like I said, if you're going for a general body shot, 1 to 2 inch displacement at 100 yards is very much so dealable. But like I said, if you're trying to get precise bullseyes with this thing, it's probably outside the realm of what is realistic for this kind of gun. Not impossible, but I would say that that would be extending it a little too much. But nonetheless, you can get them to run if you know what you're doing ahead of time. And like I said, I'm not a Palmetto State Armory approved armorer, if I could talk. I'm not a gunsmith, anything like that. Okay, I'm not telling you what you should do with your guns. I'm just telling you what I do with my guns to get them to run right. And like I said, they're at a price point that I can afford. They have a decent feature set. I love the Magpul MOA foregrip on here. I love the regular hand grip because it's a little bit bigger than a lot of the standard AK ones. And even this SBA 3 tactical brace is actually pretty nice. It's actually very lightweight as well. And if you're going for a short gun, one of the things you kind of want it to be is a little bit lighter. AKs aren't super light guns, even with short barrels, but doing something that makes it a little bit lighter, like using the SBA 3 brace system, does make sense. So yeah, I like the feature set, the price point I can afford. The longevity is something that I'm not super convinced that they're doing all that great on. I'm just checking the front trunnion here. On my full size, the GF3, the locking lugs and the trunnion began to splash a little bit, and some of those contact surfaces are splashed on this one as well, just a little bit. But again, in my experience, you file them a little bit, it keeps them running. You should probably be able to get them to run 5,000 to 10,000 rounds, which isn't a super great longevity for an AK, but it will get you down the road, and they're still available in 2020. You have to be fairly picky about watching the website, because they release things in weird times of the day and whatnot, and you've kind of got to watch it like a hawk in order to get the availability you want. But if you're willing to do that, you can get a fairly decent product for a fairly decent price that will last you a decent amount of time, but you are going to have to put in some work on them, in my experience. You know, like I said, it's like buying a brand new car and but it was sold to you with ball tires on it. You know, it's kind of the deal. If you're willing to put up with that, I think they're fun products and good. And people would ask, you know, would you trust your life to it? Now that I've made the changes that I've made to it and been able to test it with a very wide variety of ammunition, including like the worst possible tool ammo on the face of the planet, yes, I would say I'd be willing to trust my life to it. But like I said, that's after doing the work on it. Is it worth it to you? Well, ultimately that's your call. But they are available in 2020. You have to watch the website like a hawk, but they are available in 2020. The price is comparable with other AKs that have been out there this year. They have a good feature set, and they might not last a whole lot of time compared to other AKs that are out there. But 5,000 to 10,000 rounds will probably get most people through whatever they need to do, depending at least. Alright, so that is my assessment, my initial assessment of the Palmetto State Armory AKP. And like I said, the best way that I can explain it is you went and bought a new car, but the dealership sold it to you with ball tires on it. That's what it is. Otherwise, a great product, everything I wanted, but, you know, some work required beforehand. Thank you all very much for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you come to know the true Christ of history, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.